The town is. Thank you, thanks. The town reserved the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use a full name or acts inappropriately. We are using Zoom for this meeting, which allows for the public to participate in the meeting as an attendee. I would ask that attendees join in listening mode and then click your raise hand button if you have a question or wish to speak. And I will do my best to call on folks with their hands raised in the order that they were raised. Confirming member access is a preliminary matter. This is Joe Grouse, Chair of the Town Council Study Committee. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. I'll go this way. Rachel.
Aye.
Jeff. Jill.
Aye.
Donna.
Hi.
Hi. Kelly.
Okay.
Anybody on the Tom's up there? Tom?
Here.
And Pamela, you might as well acknowledge your, give you a chance to acknowledge your existence, even though you're here as an alternate, so. All right.
Okay.
Never mind. Let's see, there are no staff members, anticipated speakers on the agenda. Can I ask the three folks from the Collins Center, Anthony?
I can hear you.
All right, Mel?
Yes.
And Patricia?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you so much. Good afternoon. This open meeting of the Town Council Study Committee is being conducted remotely and in hybrid fashion pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless the participation is required by law. This meeting will allow public comment. Let's say, please note that the meeting is being recorded and that all attendees some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Let's see. I'm going to stop it right there. I think that's sufficient. And I guess we have to have a motion to accept the agenda. I hope everybody's had a chance to review it. Can I have a motion to accept the agenda, please?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Rachel?
Aye.
Jeff? Aye. Let's see. Oh, Caroline, you're up there.
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Jill?
Aye.
Skip Top and Kelly.
Aye.
And Joe, aye. All right. The Town Council Study Committee meeting is being recorded, and I sent around actually two sets of minutes, one for the July 10th meeting that I composed, and one that Curtis threw together or composed for June 24th. Has everyone had a chance to read those?
Yes.
Or review?
Yes, I'm missing in the attendance on the June one. And I was there.
Okay. So can I have a motion to accept the two sets of minutes as amended by Caroline?
So moved.
Second. And go the other way, Kelly,
Aye.
Jill,
Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
Caroline.
Aye.
Jeff. Aye. And Rachel.
Aye.
Okay. I don't think I've got, I'm sitting here, I don't think I have any particular administrative comments. There is, I got an email to, actually two emails today. There is a Brant Point Homeowners Association meeting this Saturday, Caroline, I think that you and Curtis are going to cover.
Correct.
Okay, and I also got an invitation today for, I think it was second week of August for the what's the development on Old South Road?
Richmond Point.
Yeah, across the street.
No shop.
No Shop. The No Shop Homeowners Association asked us to come and speak, so I thought that Curtis and I could do that one. I think it's on the 18th of August via Zoom.
Oh.
I think with that, unless anybody has any other sort of administrivia to bring up, we can move on, and Anthony, we can turn it over to you folks, and I think everybody has received the materials you distributed. We've got copies here for people to work from, and go for it.
Great. So I'm going to turn over the majority of this to Patricia Lloyd, who's on our team, who did most of this research. We sent a lot of stuff to you. There's other stuff that we haven't sent because we didn't want to overwhelm you too much. And I guess what I'm gonna do is just do some quick level setting. So we sent 4 documents to you, 2 of which directly relate to the subject of this meeting. One is a memo that includes the language that we discussed in the last meeting regarding the chief executive. So I think maybe we can start there. The second part of that memo also includes the topic of discussion for this meeting, which is on the legislative branch. So we could probably do those in pieces. And then there's there are 2 sort of supplemental documents about questions that we've heard that address issues around a citizen participation and other things, which aren't necessarily items that we plan to discuss, but we could if the committee wishes to do that. But I think I'd first turn it over to you guys to hear if regarding the first part of that memo regarding the executive authority, if those were the amendments that you guys were looking for us to have changed. Again, we parked the issue of appointments to boards and commissions pending the conversation on the legislative section. But other than that, we've incorporated all the comments from the last meeting into that section.
Does anybody have any reactions, comments to Anthony? And I guess it's the first 3 or 4 pages of the July 18th memorandum on draft Article 3 Town Council language. Donna?
I just had a question, Article 2 legislative. It says a reasonable opportunity for the public to speak at town council meetings. I thought that would be every time.
That's true, but also we're going to spend most of the time talking about Article 2, I think, today. Correct, Anthony? So
Correct.
well, the way I understand Anthony's question is, does anybody have any comments, corrections, edits, or about Article 3, which is what we talked about 2 weeks ago?
Okay, sorry.
I don't, for our discussion later on appointments, but I know that's.
Yeah, I didn't either. I mean, just I thought the sections in red that are on those first 1, 2, 4 or 5 pages, I think conform with what we talked about, Anthony, and with that exception about holding back the issue on appointments till after our conversation today, I thought it read fine. So do we want to take a vote on that, or do we want to let sort of move along for a while?
Jill has a question.
Jill?
My only question is, because this came up from town meeting, which is about the appointment, because she's in charge of town manager's in charge of hiring. But does that change anything with how it's working now with the MPEDC hiring the head of the plus office? Because that's like a shared position. And I'm bringing it up because we were asked to bring it up from town meeting.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that needs special language or if this covers it and there's sort of an agreement there. Now, the MPDC is also going through its own changes, like they're going to propose an article to make changes as
Right.
well.
I guess I've always presumed that we're going to have a conversation somewhere along the line, maybe further out, about some of the bodies that manage issues for the town, like the NEMPDC, NP and EDC, and the fact that we're a county and a town. So I assume we're going to have to talk about some of those oddball group organizations or commissions, just to see if they're covered by the general language or whether we need specific language.
Right, since they have their own language, but I don't know if their language actually says anything about hiring a director.
I don't know what to say. I don't know if Anthony, if you are you familiar with the the NP and EDC here on Nantucket, and its structure is, it's sort of an independent body. The board is independent, and yet the employees that work within the NP and EDC are kind of co-employees, I think, with the town, and and the body. So am I saying that right?
I'm sure he
Yeah,
knows.
okay, basically, either Joe has really made us fool of himself or,
No, I think you're right.
I don't think we specifically looked at that issue, but we can, and you're referring to the Nantucket Planning Economic Development Commission, is that correct?
correct. And
Um,
it has sort of a unique mixed status here on the island, in terms of its governance and its, where its employees come from.
So so we can look into that. I mean, the only thing I think I could say now, and I guess it didn't particularly come up, is we did tease or briefly talk about the last meeting that there are going to be some places where, because you're combined town and county, and I don't know what they're
Yeah.
related to the county.
Yeah.
I think I remember a conversation that I know that you met
Yes.
with the executive director a few meetings ago, to be aware that that will change some relationships there. But it's just mapping over the changes we do for the town charter to the county charter, and we've got it in front of us. So we can do that at some point.
I mean, for what it's worth, Jill, I mean, my philosophy since the beginning of our meetings, has been to try to map over as much of the current structure
Oh, I
to
agree.
this as possible. So now I don't know if that's what we should do for the NP and EDC, but I figure this whole conversion would be a lot easier to communicate and to convince people about if we try to keep things as similar to the current structure as we can. So.
Oh, I wanted to, I just wanted to make sure that was allowed for here. Based on what they do there, because our planning commission is unlike any other planning commission in the Commonwealth,
Right, because we're just for ourselves.
because we're both. Yeah.
Anthony, again, Mel and Patricia, it sounds like you probably ought to make a note to look into that a little bit, and we ought to decide whether we cover it. Maybe one of these sessions will have to cover these sort of unique bodies that Nantucket has, so.
And should we be in touch with the NP and EDC planning board people to have a conversation with them about it? Would that help us?
I mean, they could talk to Leslie just about how it works.
Yeah.
But she already appeared. They were here when she came and spoke to us.
I think maybe it'd be helpful, we'll try to get a copy. The supervision of town employees is through a memorandum of understanding between the town and NP and EDC. I'll try to get a copy of that for you guys.
Oh, that can you send that around to the committee?
Yeah. Yes.
That's fine. I just want to make sure since it got brought up.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, just for clarity, and Mel's got his hand up, so we can go to him next. But I was just gonna say, you may not need to worry so much about if the employees of this organization, I don't want to mess up the name of the commission, that's why I'm avoiding saying it, is if they are.
I do it every time, Anthony, so it's,
They're gonna rename themselves soon. So be excited about that.
if they're already town employees, then it's probably most likely that nothing really will change, aside from, I was just looking at their website and see that there's an appointment from the town of Nantucket, the county. The county appoints one of the members of their board. And so because the structure will be changing that, in that you'll have a council for both the county and the town, it might just be about clarifying that language. But other than that, if operationally you're just sharing employees across one organization with another, and their supervision is by, joined with the town manager, that's probably not gonna change on the ground. Now, we'll look deeper into that, but I'm just thinking at a first glance, it may not require a ton of in-depth study at first glance.
Great.
all right. I'll go back to my initial question. Is there any appetite for voting to accept this particular section, or do you think we ought to sort of put a few more under our belts, as it were, before we?
Yeah, I think we're not in a position to vote on things. I think we need to get a bigger stretch of conversation.
Is that okay with the group? Okay. Let's skip over that, and Anthony, I will turn it back to you. And why don't we say that, I think there's certainly been no substantive comments about section 3, and it appears consistent with everything we talked about 2 weeks ago. So I think we can sort of put it on the shelf and move on and then come back to it once we have a little more mileage, if you will, going through this.
Sounds good. Pat, I will turn it over to you. Do you want me to share screen? Do you want me to share the memo? Just tell me which documents you'd like me to put up.
I think it would be really helpful to share the memo and scroll it down to the section 2. We can go through it in order and talk about some of these points.
You can start. I'm starting to share. I'm starting to share now.
Fantastic. All right, thank you. You may have already, I'm going to assume that most of you had a chance to at least skim through the memo and think about some of the issues that we're going to be discussing today. Probably one of the most basic issues that we're going to talk about is the composition and the membership of the new town council. And so I would love to first start with hearing from you, if you've had a chance to look at this, and even if you haven't, if you have an idea of what membership, maybe you can talk amongst yourself, what membership composition you're looking for, how you're feeling about at-large representatives versus district representatives. So I'd love to throw it out to you just to hear what you've been thinking.
Anybody want to go first?
Sure. I definitely think it should be at large. I think the island's changed enough that we typically have had seasonal areas of the island that really aren't represented by the year-round community as well. And some of that's changing, but it's still, I think, there's a big difference between a lot of certain neighborhoods and others. And I was going to ask, though, on the number of council members, is that ever based on population, where you say, 7 is sort of for 20,000 and 9 is for 40,000 people, or how do you usually come to that number?
I would say that in the discussions we've had, where the town is looking to kind of maintain more of a town feel, they may want to have their numbers being on the smaller side, in order to be most similar to what people are used to. It's definitely not a strict number based on population. So, I think that 7 is on the low side, so maybe 7 or 9 might be something you'd be more interested in. Those with tend to be larger towns and cities, but not necessarily so. It's really up to you. But where you're looking to make kind of a sweep from making it look somewhat what Nantucket is seeing now, you may want to consider some on the lower side of the numbers rather than the higher. We've also heard that there are efficiency issues with more counselors than fewer counselors. So where you're looking to maximize efficiency, it's sometimes helpful to have fewer. But, it's really about your town preference. So, let us know what you've been talking about and thinking about.
Just a structural question. Is it always preferred or appropriate to have an odd number of counselors? I presume you want to be able to avoid having a tie vote. Is that?
Exactly.
Yeah. And it looks like from your table that you shared, Patricia, that, to me, 9 is sort of the most common number. There's a couple of 7s and a couple of 13s, but looks like about half of these towns on your table here have nine counselors.
And that is certainly most of them. You don't need to have 9. You could have 7. It depends on, you might want to take a look at, have you had difficulty filling the select board positions? How many people are running for these positions? Do you think that it will be difficult to come up with 9 members? Would 7 be more appropriate? What has been really the engagement of the community in running for these offices? That would be one thing for you to look at.
I think it depends on what we pay them.
That's true.
Yeah, but that's
Yeah.
not necessarily
Yeah,
gonna
That
get
is
there.
true.
I'm sitting here-
No, no, go ahead.
Good point. I would also say currently under our current government structure with the number that we have, it sort of makes sense. Because there is the election and it's more of a popularity vote in a way. And how you're presenting that, but when you're asking the council to have a little bit more of an expertise in different areas, when you increase it to 9, you can touch on all those different places a little bit better than
Yeah,
current number or at 7. So I lean towards 9 for that reason, because it seems like we're placing a little bit more of an emphasis on skill, background and such on the council members to lead the town. So I would be comfortable more at 9 than what our current level is, or even at 7.
I agree with Rachel.
She said Rachel. It sounded like Joe,
Yeah.
but she said Jen.
It's okay.
Sorry, what?
No.
So that's just my 2 cents on the 9. When I read that, I just immediately gravitated towards 9 with that kind of. I think 13 is too many, 11 just seems like too many as well, but I don't know.
I feel like I don't.
Almost like an
Oh, sorry.
intuitive kind of feeling versus more, but I do think if we're taking from the select board and adding a little bit more authority to them, and what their next steps are and how they govern. That 9 might allow a little bit more of that diversity to create enough of a skill without being too many people to even create a decision.
Kelly, got a comment?
Well, yeah, I don't, and unfortunately, it doesn't have a resolution. I don't feel like I know the right questions to ask about the difference between 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Like, I get we have preferences from what we learned, but I'd almost maybe want to hear if the Collins Center does have more content about this.
Well-
And also the other thing I was thinking is like, didn't we? Sorry, we've talked about enough towns that I get a little confused. Like, I feel like we've talked about Barnstable a lot. And Curtis, that's the town he's watched a bunch, right?
Yeah.
Like everything he said seems like that runs pretty well, and that's 13. So I think, well, the obvious reasons for less efficiency with the bigger group. I don't feel like there's anything that I've heard that is like, oh, that's an obvious
Well,
number.
my impression is. And sort of do whatever you want, we could make it 5 if we really wanted to. But it strikes me that, going to at least 9, you're gonna dilute the power of each of these seats, if you will. From the select board to a town council, and I sort of like the idea of. Having a more diffuse power structure, if you will, so you don't have 5 people. Where, 3 people could force a decision on a very big deal. I think, if you have 9, you're gonna have to at least get 5 people to decide that we wanna do that sewer project or
Yeah.
whatever, something that's either a lot of money or controversial. Sorry, Ben.
Are we gonna go back to like wards or zones and build up to help us arrive at 9, 11, or 13? And at large, we were talking about a combination of representatives of certain areas and on Nantucket, as well as maybe adding some at large. I mean, start from the bottom up.
I'll let Joe go.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, Joe, go ahead. I'm here.
One is, I agree with you about the 9. I'd like to 7 because we're small and but I hear you on the 9, and we also, on big issues, we tend to have somebody, and maybe if we have 9, maybe even 2 people that need to recuse. We do run into that.
Mhm.
So maybe there'll be less of that if it's a professional body and they're paid, and maybe that'll affect even their ethics forms differently or their job. I don't know. But I can see we're saying 5 is like makes a greater impact than to say 4. But I feel very strongly that we do not do districts here.
Okay.
Very,
Like
that's a deal breaker for me. I don't know if the rest of you feel that way, but I do not know how we would carve up the island, and every area of this island has its own unique challenge. And then you're gonna find people who are like, oh, I want to run somebody just from this area because of that one issue. I think we all know which issue I'm thinking of. I mean, I just don't see how that works. We want this group to come together and not
Yeah.
be like pitted against each other based on that.
I understand that and I agree, but I think also we don't want representatives from one area of the island. It could be that if it's all at large. I guess, do
It's
we
not
want to
happening.
have?
That's the risk now, though, and I don't see that.
It has,
Okay,
I think if you do expand it to 9, the risk of that happening,
okay.
that makes sense. I mean, I'm with you. I like the at-large concept instead of the districts. And I don't know, I think I've worked with different boards and you're right, I never even thought about the recusing, because that's usually something that happens on
That happens in
very
this,
hot topics. There's usually
Select
one or
one.
two people who meet, so you still want to have a good, solid group of people with a diversity of opinion to be able to come to a good consensus that's representative of the community. So that makes.
I think it puts pressure on them to represent everybody
Yeah.
and not the other way around.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
Caroline, you may have had your, I'm not sure how long you've had your hand up, sorry.
That's all right. Thank you. I just wanted to also add that with the select board being 5 members and with our trying to purposely make a change, keeping it fully away from the small number of 5, which I think moves us up to 9 or beyond. I would be in favor of 9 or 11. And I'm realizing that Nantucket, while it's very small, there's a real diverseness in areas of interest and types of individuals, population, subpopulation, and I think a larger number, even though we're small, would be more reflective of that, especially with the need for people to recuse, which, as we see, often does happen. And the other thing I wanted to bring up is we keep talking about professionals who would have more ethics, or if we're paying them, they would be motivated in different ways. And I don't really see it that way. I think that just because someone is a professional, because they're getting paid, I don't think that changes materially the types of people or their motivations for running for these offices. And so I just would caution us from over relying on that prospect. And I do think it would merit some conversation about how we would, what kinds of things we would write into the charter to encourage and vet people around ethics. Like, I don't know how you do that, but what kind of oath is taken and what kind of how people are supposed to conduct themselves in these offices, like I'm curious from the Collins Center, is that something that you have knowledge of as they go into the charters? Thanks.
I think she misunderstood I think you misunderstood what I said. Their ethics isn't going to change. That's governed by the state and the state rules. So that isn't going to change what they have to put down in terms of maybe their holdings or their assets, or, what they choose to say is, hey, I'm going to have a conflict here. They already have to do that. It's not that it's going to be different, but because they're paid, I think the scrutiny of that might increase even more. I think that's kind of what Rachel was getting at too, a little bit, that, when you have 9 people and then again, because they're paid, I do think we're going to be able to capture a wider group of people to run for office here. I think there could be, I think we could see some really different people do it. And which is going to help with that cross section of the island as well. But
For kind of non-contested or vacancy, where we have a candidate.
like no candidate or just one?
Maybe count and
I can't
contribute.
think of one, but I also can only think of maybe 2 or 3 elections where we actually had contested seats. I mean, we generally struggle. Struggle might be a little strong word. It's a little bit of a fight to get an extra candidate or 2, certainly for select board seats. And then when you start going down into commissions and boards, And we're always, I mean, I think other than the Shellfish Commission,
That's a different story altogether, but
anyway.
maybe you're right, maybe
I
if there
think
is.
Tom
has his hand up.
I'm sorry, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I have so much to say on all this that I'm gonna try and keep it brief. I should probably write it out. I've been thinking about writing like I'm a year plus into select board seat. This is what it's really like, kind of op-ed anyway. Maybe that's more appropriate time for this, but I can say that on one reason why there aren't a lot of contested elections is because and I don't want to go too far into it or my own stuff, but this is a absolute ton of work, especially the last couple of weeks with everything that's been going on. And while I love it and love being in it, there aren't that many people, there aren't enough people, let's say, who want to make this their life. Yeah, at times this is more than a full-time job. And so there are emails, there are briefings, there's committee work, there's my weekly meeting with town admin, there's constituent stuff and people running into you and Stop and Shop and asking you questions. And I'm all for that. I love it, but it completely takes over your life. And there are pluses, minuses, and differences, whatever for that. So I think that the devil's in, as Joe said many times, the devil's in the details, proof is in the pudding on whatever you make these counselors, their duties, their compensation, their roles, etc. But I think that needs to be seriously thought about for representation purposes. I completely agree with Jill on at large. That is an absolute non-starter for me. I don't think we want to pit areas of the island against each other and people running on single issues. I think that would be a disaster. I think it is very much in keeping with the town and county and the select board structure to do at large. And then finally, I will say that 7 or 9, anything bigger is too unruly. There is too much. There is too much for even town admin to brief 13 counselors on every week and get them fully up to speed and feeling like if they're the executive and the legislative, it is so much work to be able to do that. I feel very strongly 7 or 9. 9 is even a stretch for me, but that would not be the hill I'd be willing to die on. I'm gonna stop there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No, we hear it.
Is it-
That's
is
so
it-
helpful, Tom.
Is it really that much work, Tom? I'm just kidding. I was joking. Bad joke. Bad joke.
Bad joke. He's not.
Anthony, your hand's up. What's up?
Sorry, I just had to find the mute button again. Yeah, I just wanted to, based on the conversation, we did some additional research. So I just wanted to sort of add to that. So I want to, let me see, I want to share a different screen. So we did an analysis on, these are candidates, where candidates have lived on the island dating back to about 2017. So just anecdotally talking about the issue of, well, not anecdotally, but based on this information, these are candidates. So you'll see that they all cluster around this center portion here of the island, which I don't think, well, I'll leave it to the committee, but the majority of your population is in this area that all these candidates are from. It's a significant, you have a significant decrease in population and population density as you move away from this area. So I wouldn't say that this sort of screams that areas are being unrepresented based on, your past elections and candidates. And then number 2, just to sort of build on that, the last point about are seats competitive, based on the number of candidates over these elections, the town has an election a year to fill at least one spot on and this is only select board seats. To fill the select board, it's I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it's averages more than 1 candidate per seat per election. So not uncompetitive, not extraordinarily competitive. There's a concentration, but the concentration seems to be based on where most of the population of the island lives. I just wanted to add that to the discussion.
Jill?
No, that's so helpful. And I love that map. That's like perfect. That's
Yeah.
exactly what it should be. So I'm also with Tom a little bit. I like 7 better than 9. And I also, one of the reasons is because of the staggered terms. Like if you have 9, are you doing 3 people with a 3-year term every year and you're voting for 3 people? Like that seems slightly overwhelming.
Mhm.
I don't love that, but
Really? I mean, you're gonna have an election every year no matter what, whether you're voting for 1 or 3 or 6 or 2, what difference does it make?
I think that's kind of a lot for one board to go through that much change that quickly. I don't know, but the way they do it now is 2-2-1. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, Kelly, you have your hand up.
No, I think this is a
I-
good conversation.
Yeah, just from my, yeah, no, I think it's a good conversation. I kind of like 9 better than 7. I sort of like diluting the 5 select board members to 9. I'm surprised at how many at-large towns there are, although they're also, it's about half and half. I mean, in terms of, people who use districts or precincts versus all at large. I guess I agree with everybody who's commented that, at large, just having at large representatives makes sense. However, my one thought on that is if we have our public hearing, say in September, and members of the public get up here and say, I live in Sconset, I want someone from Sconset who represents me, or I live in Mattocket, or I live, whatever. I guess I could probably be arm twisted into shifting that and saying, 5 at large and 4. I don't know, somehow. It may be more for show than for substance, but okay, you have a Sconset person and a Mattocket person and I don't know how else I can do it, but anyway.
So I would
But
throw
I would just trade it away. I mean, I would see that as a sort of a trading chip. If to get people's support, I'd probably be willing to go either go to having some precinct type structure.
So my thoughts on it, I prefer the number 9. But then second choice would maybe be 7. And they above that is too much. But I totally agree. I think it needs to be all at large because I think, and I'll even admit I'm nerdy enough where I looked at some of our census mapping and kind of like try to think about how districts go. And if you center it around population, some of the geographic areas just get huge. So you're asking someone in Wisconsin to also cover Squam and Quinnet or Winnet, and like you get these huge areas that have very diverse interests and problems
Mhm.
to cover those, and some are very small, right, for geographic challenges, and it's just. I think it would be a lot, and I think as soon as you even start to partition and say, we're gonna have 4 districts, someone's always gonna be, well, we should have been the 4th this year. Or we should have been, one of the districts, right? I can already hear Surfside being like, we should have been one of the 4, and then you get the other side of Surfside saying, we should have been the other one because they already knew that. I'm kind of on the all at large because then it evens the playing field. And if you want a candidate from your area, find someone to run.
right, who likes your issue?
And then if you
Yeah.
want them on the board, rally the voters in your area to make sure they get voted in. I mean, that's
Yeah.
to me, how it should work is.
Donna and then Caroline.
I think 9 would actually cover that. Following, segueing what you're saying, Jeff, and Rachel and the at-large, because it's more of an opportunity for people from Surfside to come in. So if you have 9, you will have maybe a couple of extras from different areas, precincts, zones, whatever. And at-large, I think makes sense, but I think 9 is better. Because if we run into an issue where people have to recuse themselves, we still have a good representation. And I think those folks who wanted a representative form of government, I think they would be more open to 9. It gives them more of an opportunity, I think, to represent everybody.
Thank you. Caroline, was your hand up? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, it was so helpful to hear from Tom, given his position and experience. And, Jeff and Jill too, because of viewers. And I really am, I'm really aware of, with a small island, it's better not to parse it up and I think someone said the term pit people against each other. I think that's just a natural feeling if you're starting to represent different areas of the island, and it's better to have at large because then it's representing the whole island. And we do want these council members to be thinking of the whole island, not just issues. Of course, they will do that. And what Jeff said about the democratic process, if you want somebody to represent your area because they live there, then get them to run and get people to vote for them. Thanks.
Kelly, have some?
Yeah, I was wondering like what, if there's any theory or if there's like Collins Center knows about like average district sizes in regards to geography, like how many square miles,
Or
and
miles or people or, you know,
or no, geographically speaking, because I'm wondering how that affects between the amount of land we've conserved on Nantucket and the size of Nantucket. Do we get to a situation where like compared to, and I was just trying to Google how big Amherst is, like square mileage wise. And do we get to a point where districts don't even make sense because districts are typically like encompass a much larger area than can even really fit on Nantucket? Just,
I don't know.
yeah, I have no
I
idea.
it strikes me that the square mileage of the town doesn't have anywhere near as much impact as people. You know, and representative, you know, you want to represent, if you want to have precincts or some sort of subdivisions of the town, it's how many people are in each precinct.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's the
that,
same
and that's
question,
that
but
would end up
population.
defining how big each precinct was.
And then another question to the Collins Center, just wondering if there is any like literature or studies about kind of like voter, like how voters feel about various sizes of town councils. Of certain towns, is it 9 to 6? Yeah, town council's 9 as a voter.
I don't know, Anthony, does anybody from the Collins Center have a comment about whether citizens or voters have expressed any preferences for the size of a town council?
I'm not aware of any research on that, on how the voters feel. I don't know, Pat, if you have anything.
No, I don't think there have been any studies about how the voters feel. We have some anecdotal information, you know, from we have run we've had a few for panels where we have had mayors and town managers come talk to us, and some of them recommend we stay on the smaller end just for ease of operation. So we've heard that anecdotally, but we don't have any studies. Anthony, I think you had your hand, something else you wanted to add.
Oh, no, I had my hand up. I would only add to the discussion about the size. And again, this is somewhat anecdotal, is that as the size increases of the council, and there's an upper limit, but it becomes, how would I say this? There's an argument to say that it's somewhat more independent in the sense that you have a larger number of people to convince to build up any sort of faction or do anything like that. So in a sense that it makes it unruly, in the sense that the administration or even a voter has to spend more time convincing more people. And in some ways that's a good thing if you want to have that sort of increased separation, versus the fear of a smaller council being easier to sway or easier to sort of align with the whatever the administration is in the community at that time. So that's where I sort of heard a lot about how it impacts operations of the town.
Thanks, Anthony.
Tom said it.
Yeah, no, Tom, you've been waiting, sorry.
No problem. 3 minor points. Since I've been elected and when I was running for that matter, no one's ever asked me where I live on island. Nor have I ever thought of any of my colleagues' votes as like, oh, well, X person lives in town or whatever. That it's just not, it's not a thing. And I think it's the best way that way. To Caroline's point, just in the most general sense on ethics, Caroline, when I was elected, literally day one, John Giorgio was in the town building, town council. We met initially. Then we met again. And if there are any questions that I have of something I should recuse from, or I had a question for him 2 weeks ago on something that was very complicated. And I reached out to him, and usually the protocol is to get in touch with Libby and make sure that, you know, as I do, as all select board members do when we're contacting department heads. And those kind of things. I have my giant binder here from town council of procedures and info and fact sheets and memorandums, et cetera. And also went to the newly elected Mass Municipal Select Board training off island. Actually, I went to 2 of them. So we do as select board members have those kinds of things, and I would imagine at town council be exactly the same thing. And then third thing would be, I also strongly suggest getting other current and former select board members' opinions on what it's like serving on Nantucket, because I'm just obviously just one voice here. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Caroline?
Thank you. Just to respond, I think it was helpful to hear that, Tom. I'm thinking more about the dictate to, as a town councilor, to represent all views, not just your views. And I'm not sure at what point that is spelled out, or if there's educative seminars about that. I don't know where a politician, if you were, where they find out about that, where they learn about that, how they learn how to do that.
What did she mean?
So a politician being somebody who's representing all the voters, not just a faction or themselves or their opinion. I don't know where people learn about that, but I think that's the type of person that we expect our select board members do that, and we would expect our town councilors to do that. And I'm just curious about where that resource is, and where they are when they're taking an oath. Is that part of the oath?
I would think
I
so.
don't think we're putting an
It's
oath
already
in the
there.
charter.
Well,
It's
my guess is
already
they take, you get signed, you get sworn in as it is now, and I think, you know, I can't remember what the swearing in says, but I'm sure that it.
Town of
deals with-
Nantucket
Yeah.
County.
Yeah. I think it exists.
I mean,
already.
some of the
Yeah,
other stuff,
I don't-
Caroline, I guess I don't expect the 5 select board members or 9 or whatever town councilors to be all completely neutral. I assume they come with, you know, either constituent preferences that elected them, or their own biases about, they think, you know, short-term rentals are good, short-term rentals are bad. Yeah, I know. So, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, may I leave a quick point, just as something to think about as a select board member that I've thought about many times? And it's not a direct comparison, and it is sort of philosophical, but being a select board member is sort of like the US Senate, where senators represent the states. We represent the town as well. Yes, we're voted by the people, but we should do what's best for the town and county. I'll just leave that as a philosophical point. That's something that is in my thinking a lot.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's what I would personally expect people to do, but anyway. I forget who's at the right.
Mel has had his hand up.
I'm sorry, okay. Sorry, Don,
That's
I'll get back around. Mel?
I was gonna comment on the size of the council. So I would agree with Pat that there's really no body of a study that makes determinations about people's satisfaction, but this could be changed. And there are many charters that have been around for a long time. And many charters have a 5 or 10 year review process. So to my knowledge, not many have changed their size, but we'll have to look at that. And if any have, we would probably try to tell you why. But from my point of view, it's a very personal decision, and it tends not to change from time to time.
Okay, I'm gonna go Rachel next, then I'll get you guys.
So it sort of follows up on that. I was just curious, since we are possibly in a transition phase, right? So when we're going to how many select board members we have now to the recommendation of, say, 9 council, it sounds like that's the majority of what people are saying. Is there language or something that we could add into the recommendation such that if we didn't get even 9 people who are interested in running, there could be a determination that says 7. Or at a later date, you know, almost like it could be, there could be something that triggers it that says. You could drop to 7 if there's nobody running. Like, are there charters that exist right now that have that? And are there towns that have ever had, say, we need 9 members and they haven't been able to fill seats? How do they handle that? Or is that just something that gets determined in maybe the transition language?
That would
That
make
makes
sense. Yes, it does.
Yeah. I don't believe there's any, you can't have like a, if
Right.
this in the charter. So I think you just set it and deal with it in the best way you can.
Okay.
Donna?
Yeah, I have 2 things. One is, I think 9 really affords broader representation across the island. That could encompass Sconset, Surfside, whatever. There's more of an opportunity to participate. And the other thing is, are we ready to make a decision as a committee as far as at large? It sounds like we've had a discussion. What is your
Well,
thought?
let me get to that. Jill, you've been.
Yeah, Mel, you said something interesting, because I'm leaning on 7 if we have to vote on this, just, like Tom said, 9's probably not gonna be a deal breaker for me, but we gotta remember we have 10,000 registered voters, right? Not even, I think just under. So we talk about 17,000 and 20 and 25,000 population, but we gotta think about how many people actually vote, and that's who we recruit from to run for office. And I wonder if we started at 7 and like Mel said, had a review process, or what if automatically you could expand? You don't have to, but you have the option to expand if your registered voters went from 10 to 13,000 or something like that, because that means the population would have.
Mel basically said that.
You just go change it
that-
whenever.
Well, they've never experienced, Collins Center's not sort of aware of situations where they've had swing, either
Yeah, but we
planning for
have.
9, you only get 7 or 7 going to 9.
I know, but I do worry about recruiting for 9. I do. I do think if we pay them well, we're gonna have a much better outcome, but so that's important. But I think I hear what you're saying about like, it's sort of a big jump to, we've been dealing with 5 and now all of a sudden we're asking people to deal with more. You're the one who keeps saying, we want to keep it as similar to what we have as possible. That is a big jump. That's all I'm saying. We don't have that many people.
Well, it's sort of the fundamental change that we're proposing here is going from 1,000 people at town meeting to 9 or 7 or whatever at the town council. I guess I would also point out that I think the logical body to go to for people who might be town councilors are the 200 or 300 people who are the hardcore open town meeting, supporters, who now they're not going to be able to go to town meeting, but they might say, well, I'm highly interested in politics and Nantucket issues, and oh hell, I'll run.
And you're gonna pay me.
I'll put, maybe I'm gonna be on this committee.
Yeah.
No, I hear you. I always said that number's not gonna be a deal breaker
I mean,
for me, but someone.
I think we're asking people to, asking the island to shift to 9. And I like the term professional politicians. I expect them to be ethical and hardworking and professional and represent the views of the people of the island.
They get paid for it.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
I think the really short answer to it is the charter is also gonna create some level of incentive for people to vote, right? Maybe the change in government helps, maybe compensation helps. And you can adjust that to try to get people, because right now, I don't want to speak for Tom, I would never pretend to do it, but I mean, the time that the 5 of them give is extraordinary for $5,000.
I know.
Yeah.
I agree.
They work a full-time job and the hourly rate is, I mean, it's like below $1 now by the time they get it out, right? Like, and that's who we're asking to make executive decisions for the town, and we're compensating them less than $1 an hour, and I think you asked if that was acceptable, most people would say no. I think this is an opportunity to say, if we want someone to set aside, well, they might be a working professional and say, I want to set aside 3 years of my time and take a step back from the business I'm working in. I need to make up for that somewhere else. You can incentivize that for people to do it. You might get more participation. Just change the government alone.
Yeah.
You may get a bump in participation, but
I agree.
Yeah, I would just say, I think this has been a really fascinating conversation, but we probably ought to try to move along. I was gonna pick up, I think it was Donna. I was gonna say, I'm comfortable with 9 and just
Nine
having an
works.
at-large structure. I know there was some 7s out there, but why don't we use a working target of 9 and, 9 counselors and at-large structure and because it seems to me we have another couple of sort of term length and stagger, the other things, Patricia, on your outline here. So maybe we ought to try to move along on some of these other issues.
I think I would like to add to that real quick, Joe. I might just say, for myself personally, I like 9 at large in 3-year terms. So then it's 3, 3, and 3.
I do too.
Jeremy, you got your hand up? Got a comment or a question?
I think it's consistent with what's just been said. I thought on the numbers that you're going from 1,300 people likely to vote at most, maybe down to 300. And to give up that, I think you should have 9 rather than 7.
I think 9 at large.
Okay. Patricia, let me go back to you and see whether you can sort of move, we can push ourselves along here.
Okay, so the next question we do want to talk about is term length. Just to give you a quick thumbnail, terms can be 2, 3, or 4 years. If you want to continue with 3-year terms, then elections would be held in the spring. And I'll explain why in a minute. If you want an even number of terms, then many communities hold those elections in November on years opposite, so in odd years, so that they're not at the same time as state and federal elections. The reason for this is right now, the Secretary of State discourages and in some cases prohibits local elections being held at the same time as federal and state elections. So if you have a 3-year term, then inevitably it's one of those elections is going to fall in an even year. So then you would want to have them in the spring. It also sometimes helps towns transition to having elections when they're usually happening instead of moving to fall elections. So does anybody want to talk about whether they have an interest in, I think right now you have 3-year terms staggered. If you have 3-year terms, then they're often staggered and it's fairly easy to do that. If you have even numbered terms, 2-year terms are usually everyone is reelected at the same time every 2 years. 4-year terms, there allows for some staggering.
Jeff, go
I'll
for it.
say, I like 3-year terms. Just because it keeps it on the number 9, but I also like 3-year terms because I think everyone is used to going out to vote in the spring. On it, like that's when we vote for select board and planning board and all those things, and that keeps it the same.
Okay.
Yeah, I like 3-year terms because when someone's elected, it takes a little while to come up to speed. And then you're sailing and then maybe you're heading out after the 3rd year. So we have, some experienced representatives. And 3 years is already our tradition. I'd leave it.
Kelly.
Feel a little bit, I don't know, self-conscious. My questions keep being like macro or kind of ethereal or whatever. But I think what I'm wondering is there more, does it allow for more continuity for the person in the role at 4 years? Like, does the 3rd year, if it's a 3-year term, does the last year come around and then they're so focused on possibly running again or other, other possible distractions or competition in an election that they lose the ability to put time into the job itself? I think another kind of question where I don't have any insight into, but it's a big question in my head.
Tom, you read my mind. I was gonna turn to you. Go for it.
Well, I think one thing that's maybe slightly illustrative of what a discussion was recently is at the annual town meeting last year, if I remember correctly, there was a home rule petition to change the select board term to 5 years, and that did not pass. That was done by one of my colleagues. And I think that 3 years is a good balance. So I agree with the bulk of the comments so far.
And you don't think that, you know, if you take out the getting up to speed time at the beginning and, you know, electioneering or whatever at the tail end of your 3 years, your experience or your observation of other select board members is that they still are effective in their role for kind of the whole term?
You really don't have a choice. Like you have to stay up on this stuff. It's like college or grad school. Once you get behind, you're done. But so you really, once you sign up for this, you're in it. And I think that any select board member knows that, learns that very quickly.
Tom's perspective feels really validating. Does Collins Center have just any input on that aspect of 2 3 year versus 4 years?
One thing to keep in mind is that if you have 4-year terms and they're staggered, it's likely you'll have an election every 2 years where half of your town council is up for election. If you have a 3-year, then only a third is up for election. So, you know, the thought being that only a third are concerned with campaigning in any given year. Definitely, many people feel that 2-year terms, everyone is up for election every 2 years. And that can certainly have impacts when there's campaigning, and 3 years does give you a little more time. But, you know, as was said, there are duties in this position that have to be performed regardless of whether it's a campaign year or not.
I'll just say, and I know this is kind of a pie in the sky thing, but if you're worried about campaigning at the end of your 3rd years, do a better job. Be good. You don't have to worry about it, right? Like, I always hate to say like be more better, but like, if you do a great job, you shouldn't have to worry about campaigning that hard because you're doing a great job.
Right.
Yeah.
Should be that easy. Focus on your job. You're good. Get your life.
I'm hearing 3 years and 3 year and staggered terms that seem to be reasonably acceptable to the group.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, Patricia, move it.
So
Let's move on.
We'll move on to the next section. Anthony, if you could scroll up a little bit. This section, as it's written, says that anyone who's holding another town office, position, or employment, before they take the oath, they have to end that employment or other position. This so that anyone can run for office. It could be a school committee member. It could be someone who has a position with the town, but that that you could not hold a council position at the same time as you're employed or holding another elected office. This is somewhat typical. But at the same time, in a smaller community, you know, you may have people who are fulfilling many roles at once. So this is something for you to talk about. And also, there is a bar in this, you know, sample language on waiting a year until after the council time has terminated in order to take another position with the town. So you might want to talk about what situations are occurring in your town, whether you have a lot of people who are holding multiple elected offices, or whether you feel this is workable. Oftentimes, this type of arrangement is meant to reduce the amount of times that someone would have to recuse themselves from a decision because they're also a town employee or they're also on the school committee. So you may want to talk a bit about whether you think that this is reasonable in your town.
I'm gonna lean on Tom Dixon. Tom, do you know whether our current bylaws prohibit a member of the select board from either being employed by the town or being on another commission or board of the town? I assume they do, but I don't know.
That's exactly what I would say. I assume they do. And I think the sort of thinking out there is that they do, but whether it literally says that or not, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Like I wouldn't go apply for a town job right now. I mean, I wouldn't even think of that. I'd be like, oh no, I'm a select board member. I need to resign. So whether that's actually the case or not, I'd have to figure that out, but yeah.
I'm sorry.
I can actually say we've had this happen before. Jason Bridges was an employee of the town, when he was elected to the select board, and he resigned once he was elected.
Yeah,
But I think it's important that you just would have to recuse on so much if you were trying to do both. And I say that as a town, employee, like I think they should be separate for sure.
Now, I'm sorry.
I think it's like divided loyalties. And based on what Tom is saying, you don't have time for a second position. I mean, if you're going to devote yourself to town council, that's it. And that way, based on recusing and so forth, I don't think there's room for that personally.
The only thing I would say is it says they couldn't maybe work for the town for a year. Yeah. Kind of what you have outlined.
Right, that's in there. That is something that, you know, you can make a different decision on.
I just recommend it as a little bit shorter. We've been short town employees, and if a town council member wanted to become an employee, it doesn't matter if it's 6 months or a year. I mean, have a little bit of time, but sometimes it's a real benefit to have people.
I think the concern is that you would have some sort of undue influence, but I think 6 months is fine.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Tom.
Yeah, when I left my legislative liaison job, that's part of the deal, is that they call it a cooling off period. You cannot participate in any matters that appeared before you, quote unquote, for a year.
Yeah, I think he is good.
Do you know whether that's the current policy for you, for select board members?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I'd
Actually,
mean,
might be longer for
be
this.
Christy Parentella, but she went to a private sector job for a while before she took a job with the town.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I think having a cooling off period makes sense. I could see doing 6 months instead of a year, you know.
Like, I know if I leave my job, I can't appear in front of the conservation commission for. Mine's a little longer, but for at least a year in most cases. The fear of that, they'd be like, oh, you guys have helped us before. Of course, what he said is very.
So could we find out what the tradition is?
well, that's what she's recommending, a year. I just was saying maybe we shorten it a little bit because sometimes we really have a hard time finding people who live here, have a home here, understand the island and apply for these jobs. Like we're
Yeah. And there's-
short finding people.
And there's undue influence.
Period also outlined in the state's.
Oh, that's a good question.
I don't know. So maybe it's a
You
year.
wouldn't want to shorten it out.
No,
what they recommend.
She just said 1 year and I was thinking,
Patricia, do you know, is that something that's specified by the state or?
You know,
So-
I'm not sure. I'll have to look at that, but the thing to understand is that the state conflict of interest laws are going to prevail. So they're in addition to whatever you put in here. So this can set stricter requirements than the state, but it cannot set looser requirements. So, you know, I'm not sure. Mel or Anthony, I'm not sure if you're aware if there's a 1 year requirement. I don't believe there is.
I'd have to look at the conflict of interest law. A year is a very standard term of a cooling off period, but we'll have to do some more work. I just want to clarify that if you were a select board member or any person who has specific knowledge of an issue, you can never take action on that in your private duties. That's a lifelong prohibition.
Well, why don't we leave it at one? I'm sorry, Kelly.
Well, no, I like your logic, Jill, in that in a place where we are often struggling for skilled or adequate labor for certain positions, especially civic positions, I would think making it more easily to broaden that labor pool, I would lean on that side. Obviously, with whatever the state conflict like that will take
I
precedence.
mean,
but-
I don't feel strongly either way. I was just gonna suggest going with a standard 1 year, but if the committee prefers 6 months, I'm happy to use 6 months as a working characteristic.
Real quickly, is just brought up the the state summary for it is they have, for 1 year after you leave your state job, you may not participate in any matter of which you had official responsibility during your last 2 years of service.
That's as a
That's
state job.
Yeah.
It's a state job, but I'm pretty sure that's reflected the same for.
And
Mr.
this
Chair,
prevails over
Yeah, Tom.
county.
I'll find it out.
yeah, and that would reflect a full 2-year legislative session. That's why it's 2 years for that. Because in theory, bills might expire and then, yeah, so.
Can we find out what the prevailing state law is and then go from there?
Well,
yeah,
Year
I think-
makes sense.
A year, I think, is important because when you're making decisions on town council and you're being adequately compensated, we're going back to that. So I think a year is important so that one is not influenced about certain things.
Also, I did this, if I would have kept scrolling, I would have gotten the municipal job part. It reads the exact same for municipal job. And then the other part to that is after you leave your municipal job, you may never work for anyone other than the municipality automatically you worked on as a municipal employee. So it's really probably it's like, yeah, so like.
all right, sounds like 1 year is sort of the standard.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, one thing I wanted to add quickly, this committee, while they may want to set the first salary for town council, we'll talk about that. That's in the transition section. In general, the salary will be set by the first town council for the next town council. But we've recently done a survey, and so when you're talking about being adequately compensated, to be honest, no one is ever going to be adequately compensated for all the work that you're doing as town council. Of the council manager forms, the highest salary for a counselor is 10,000, and for a council president is 12,000. So that's the kind of range that we're talking about. I just want you to, you're not necessarily, we'll talk about that in the transition section. And we'll talk about it a little bit because the next section is compensation. Usually, so what will happen is the committee will probably set, when we get to transition, how we are going to decide the first salary for who's coming in. And after that, the town council will be setting the salary for, and as we have here, it should be adopted at least 90 days before the next election. So you're not getting into office and suddenly setting the increasing the salary. Really, you're doing it when at the end of the cycle, when you don't know who's going to be holding those positions. It makes it a little more fair. So let's just talk a minute about the 2.4 compensation section. And that is where we say the council president and members shall, subject to appropriation, receive compensation for their services. So it sounds like not all towns have compensated council members. It sounds like the majority of you are interested in compensation. So you should have something in your charter about how this is going to take place. This contemplates, as this says, increasing or reducing compensation when it's adopted 90 days before the next regular, at least 90 days before the next regular town election, and takes effect following the next town election. And we also included entitlement to reimbursement of their actual and necessary expenses. This is really what we're looking at, is to make this not cost prohibitive for anyone who wants to run for town council, because there are going to be certain costs associated with it. You might have to leave work early. You might have to, grab dinner out instead of making your own dinner. You might need, a separate cell phone. There are going to be costs, and this is meant to cover this. So I wanted to just stop for a second and ask if you have any questions about the compensation. In some of the charters, now your select board is currently compensated, correct?
yes, $5,000 a year per the, and then I think the chair does get an additional stipend, but I don't know I don't remember what that is.
And do they get health insurance?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, we do. It's optional. We just had our pay raised by 1,000 from 3,500 to 4,500. The chair gets 6,000.
Okay.
And Pat, you said that the top that anyone in Massachusetts gets paid is 10,000?
In council manager forms of government, this form that that's what we've looked at. There may be differences in mayoral forms, but for example, Amherst for council managers is the one that makes the top salary, which is 10,000 or 12,000 for the president. Some, Bridgewater, Franklin, North Attleboro, Randolph, Southbridge, they have no compensation. Barnstable, it's 8,000 for members and 12,000 for the president. So it's, those are the kind of numbers that you're talking about. So I guess for this particular section, what I would say is, this is a process that seems to work. And some committees have said, well, for the first initial amount, it is going to be whatever amount the select board has been getting, and then let the town council make a determination for the following, election of what the amount is going to be. That is one way to transition it. Alternately, you can set the first amount if you want, and the town council can then change it. So that is something to to think about, especially where you're deciding tentatively to have 9 members. So
Okay. I'm sorry, Jeremy, you have your, sorry for Pat to cut you off there, but Jeremy, your hand's up.
Yes, thanks, Joe. A question for the Collins Center. Why in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is the compensation so low? I mean, we're discussing here how we're trying to attract people to do a lot of extra work and to make them as professional as possible. And I was curious, to the Collins Center perspective on the Commonwealth, why no community has decided to give some, let's call it market compensation, to people to do a market job.
Well, I'll let my colleagues also answer. A lot of it is budgeting, just a matter of what the town has budget for. And also, there's recognition that this might not be a full-time job. In pretty much every municipality, it counts as a part-time job or less. So Mel, Anthony, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think you pretty much covered it. You did say, Pat, that you're looking specifically at sort of council manager town forms. If you go to the city forms, the number changes significantly. At the upper end, you're looking at, this is for councilors, not for mayors, but 70, 80,000. So it's, I think part of it is the town mindset that.
But let's for a sec just explore that. How many extra hours do you think that a city council member works in a year? What do we think the absolute hours are that they work a year to do their job? Because I think what we're talking about here, excuse me, is we're trying to get people to be real professionals. And as Tom Dixon has said, people work very, very hard in this position. And we're trying, I think as a group, to create a very professional new group of politicians.
Well, Mel or Pat, I'd love you to comment. I guess I'm going to go bigger picture here. It has been said on this particular call a lot about sort of professionalizing the town council. I actually would sort of suggest to the committee maybe not to think about it in that way. Pat did share with you a chart about sort of thinking about elected versus appointed officials. And one of the things or a couple of things in the chart sort of highlight that this is a role that doesn't have sort of specialized knowledge and sort of things that sort of say that this is the point of your elected officials is to more closely look like your community and not to look like a person, for lack of a better word, a bureaucrat who's sort of steeped in this information, to bring a perspective to governance that a person who does it day to day and is thinking about a specific output may not always be thinking about. So, you know, I would sort of maybe push back against that framework of thinking about professional versus, you know, some other professionalizing the role, is that they're bringing an outside perspective to decisions that affect everyone on the island. With regard to the pay, and I think it varies for different positions. In very small communities, you do see certain roles not having people run for them. But I don't think it's so much about the pay as much as it is about sort of community engagement or wanting to give back and participate to the community. That's usually what we, again, here anecdotally is the driving factor for people who run for these types of positions. So I'll stop there and I'll give it back to Pat or Mel.
I have one question, Donna.
Yeah, first, are we able to set compensation? Or is that FinCom, or who sets
Oh,
compensation?
no, we
can set it?
we can definitely recommend in this structure, and we think that the town councilors get paid X. Now, I think what we're hearing is, at least what I'm hearing is the numbers are lower than I expected, but that's reality.
I think going back to what we would like as far as council members is I think we should pay them adequately. I mean, after listening to what Tom is saying, and everyone else on the select board, and I think we should consider a higher salary than 5 or 8 or something if we want. This is Nantucket and reflecting Nantucket. I think we should pay them adequately for a job well done.
Jeremy?
Now, I would say that if you paid the minimum wage of the state of Massachusetts requirements, that would exceed the high point of some of these other municipalities until you get into a city setting. So I think if one of the goals is to attract really good people, and notwithstanding the fact that they don't have specific or may not have specific domain expertise, we still want them to be more and more professional. I think we should think about paying them, you know, a heck of a lot more than what the smaller cities in the state have been paid.
I agree.
Well,
I agree.
yeah, I agree as well. But I would suggest that, you know, maybe getting into the weeds here this afternoon about whether we pay them 12,000 or 50,000 is probably not the best use of our time. I really think I would really like to see Pat get through as much of this today as we can. You know, the rest of the section 2. Caroline?
Well, I appreciate what you're saying, Joe, when we want to move along, but I also think I heard Pat say that in order to pay somebody the appropriate amounts, then we have to look at a mayoral form of government. Is that right? Or would we be able to choose to pay people more, council members more, even though the norm is 10 or the high norm is 10?
We can pay them what we want.
I'm sorry, Pat, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm going to let Mel answer that, but you can pay with them what you want, but you can make a recommendation, and that's often done in the transition section. But the town council will be looking at the as the legislative body, will be looking at the finances in total and making a decision of where they want to go with that. But I can tell that Mel has more to add on this.
Just to say that a couple of things. First of all, this salaries compensation will be set by bylaw, which is by the council. The council themselves will set the compensation. I think what we're talking about is whether it would make sense when you first start this charter to have something in the transition section that establishes an initial salary. But in the future, it will always be set by your council themselves, by bylaw, and there's procedures around that. The only other thing I would say is, you know, I definitely hear what Tom is saying, and you know, I've worked with many select boards, and he's right. It's a tough job. It's a lot of time, I think you're making a mistake if you assume that the select board is the same as the town council. It's not. There are some members on the town council who's going to work a lot, maybe the president, so on. But, in general, the council is going to be meeting less frequently than the select board did. And many of the executive functions that the select board used to hold are transferred to the town manager. So not that it's not a tough job. And I agree with all of what you said is compensation is important to set an importance to the position, to try to encourage professionals, but just a few points.
Thanks, Mel. Jeremy? Your hand's up?
Oh, I didn't lower it, sorry.
No, okay.
You want to move on?
Yeah, can we move on? I mean, why don't we all think about this? I think that, Nantucket probably has the flexibility to pay any reasonable compensation to the town council. We certainly have the budget strength to do that. Personally, I think we're not gonna go to $75,000, but maybe, but there's no reason that we have to stay, at 10,000 if that's the sort of typical number that some other communities use. We can set the number for what we want, but let's think about it and come back to it. So,
Mr.
Pat,
Chair,
yeah,
let's just say something very, very briefly, which
Sure.
is, I didn't mean my forcefulness about my comments about what it's like being a select board member to completely imbue the rest of the conversation. What's really difficult to convey, though, is exactly what it's like until you're in it. And so what I was just trying to make a macro point of, like, there's a lot of other things that happen in select board world that nobody knows about. Really, that's my bottom line. It's not necessarily the hours, if it's X hours versus another X hours. I'm just talking about in total that it's more than one would think it would be, and it might be different than some would think it would be. That's all.
okay, thank you, Tom.
Right.
Pat, can we,
Sure, absolutely. Anthony, do you want to scroll up a little bit? We're going to talk briefly about, I'm sorry, scroll down. We were talking about council procedures. Oh. And we put in there once a month. More likely it's going to be twice a month, maybe even 3 times a month if it's necessary. This is just a minimum in case there's holidays or, a weather issue. We say at least once a month. Special meetings can be held at any time if called by the president or by 3 members of the council with notice. I'm going to skim through these kind of fast. So you can scroll down a bit. Meetings are open to the public, residents, and this isn't in every single charter, but it's more common to say residents have a reasonable opportunity to speak at each meeting, except as otherwise provided by general law. How we wrote it, non-residents and other interested parties may be allowed to speak at the discretion of the council. You can rewrite that in a different way if that's more appealing to your town. I'm going to skim, but then I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk about the whole thing. And rules may include time limitations on public comments. So they may say anyone may speak, you have 3 minutes. So far, that is an acceptable limitation on public comment. A majority of the full council constitutes a quorum, and the council will establish written rules for itself. We'll have that part of that in the transition procedure, and there will be accounts of the proceedings taken, including records of votes, etc. But I'll stop now because I think there are going to be questions about what type of public comment you want to have available.
That's what I was looking at. I thought some of that was also governed by the state. I thought there wasn't a ton you could do. I mean, if the same person wants to come down and say the same thing, now it's 3 minutes.
Many say 3 minutes. You can have a limitation on time. But members of the public can come, but residents certainly have a right to speak. Sometimes they'll say non-residents speak at the discretion of the council, to limit people who might not have, not necessarily non-residents who are living in your community, but to limit outside opinions from coming in and dominating the meeting.
Pat, you may or may not be aware, but Nantucket has perhaps an unusual situation for maybe other beach or I think a good word for communities that are driven by tourism-based economy. Probably 60-70% of the real estate on Nantucket is owned by non-resident taxpayers.
She just said that was not
No,
what she
no.
meant.
Uh,
She just said that's not what she meant. She said people that are really outside the community, like maybe a lobbyist.
I
or
know, but
company.
we're talking about non-voting taxpayers.
I know, and she said that she wasn't trying to limit non-residents who are homeowners here. That's what I heard her say.
Well, I missed
Well,
that.
yeah.
But
Exactly. And this is just a starting point from language that has been used before. And so I'd encourage you to let us know what you want to have this to be. And we can write it up in a way that works best for Nantucket.
well, my question was, are there other towns that you're aware of that may be tourism-based economies where there are significant non-resident property owners or taxpayers? Do those groups have
Representation.
representation, sort of formalized representation, as opposed to just having to get there 3 minutes before the town council?
Mhm.
Are there any town governments that you're aware of that give non-voting taxpayers who happen to be a significant chunk of the tax base, a formal or regular role in town council meetings?
Right. I noticed that at your town meeting, they allow one representative, non-resident representative to speak on an issue at the moderator's discretion. But that does limit, I feel like that limits everybody to one voice who's a non-resident. So I guess I wouldn't recommend something that strict. What we have seen is some boards and committees being opened up to, one member of that board of committee can be a non-resident who either owns property, or you can limit it in certain ways. So there are roles for non-residents on boards and committees that can be included. We have seen where we'll talk later about resident participation measures. And for the first one, which we call free petition, which is where a certain number, you could include non-residents in among the people who could petition to have a matter heard by the town council. So there are other opportunities for non-residents to get involved. And we could write this in a different way to say, residents shall have a reasonable opportunity to speak. And we can say, or part-time, we can say part-time residents and full-time residents can have an opportunity to speak. We can, there can be different ways to word it depending on how much non-resident, but perhaps property owners could be involved in this.
That open.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I was gonna say, I mean, in that, this is just for group discussion, is that second sentence, could it just start with residents and non-resident taxpayers shall have a reasonable opportunity to speak? And then anyone else at the discretion of the council? I mean, anyone's speech is always to the discretion of the council.
Yeah.
Well,
Or the commission or the committee, whoever it is, when they take public comment.
Donna, you go ahead.
Well, I guess the ACNVT committee has asked if we can have, and this is up for discussion, permanent representation of some sort along with the town council somehow. Not, we can't vote, but is there some way we could become more involved without voting? As like we're talking about at large, maybe we could have a ACNVT member who would be elected by the committee and appointed to the town council. It's something different, but this is an opportunity when we're talking about a transition to voice our interest and concerns.
I mean, why?
Go ahead.
Why should you get to do that?
Why not? We're
Reason why not?
taxpayers.
You vote somewhere else. You've chosen not to exercise your vote here. You can register to vote here. You have a home here. I think you might not want to pay Massachusetts tax. Maybe that's your issue.
Oh, no, New Jersey is crazy.
Yeah. Whatever your issue is, I'm just saying, why have you chosen not to register to vote here? I mean, we have seasonal residents who are registering to vote here and, you know,
Not that many.
they're voting and they're coming to town meeting and they're writing citizen warrant articles and participating. We have that.
I would say I'd have to check, but most are non-voting because most of the non-voting taxpayers are living in other states, but they do have property here. And since we're discussing a transition of government, we would like to request, we are requesting more of a role other than just the ACNVT committee. And yes, we are able to participate at other commissions and so forth.
Yeah, you
But
do
we're
get to do that.
asking to do something a little bit more since we're considering as a group another form of government. We're not asking to vote because we can't, but we are asking to have more influence, more of a role. That's what we're asking.
Just like conceptually speaking, I just don't even know, with my limited experience, I don't know what that would look like. What would that look like? And not, and maybe
That's what I'm requesting of the committee.
I can tell you right now, here's an example. If I was gonna say that we should have, if I was gonna suggest that we have somebody on this committee to represent people who can't vote here, I'm not sure it's the seasonal community that I would do that for. We've got plenty of disenfranchised people here who can't vote and who work here and actually live here. I'm really surprised to hear that y'all are gonna say you want to be a member on our board. But not vote, you can't, and I think the town's been great about including people on the boards, actually. In some cases, it hasn't worked out. But with Zoom, it actually expanded the
Yes, it's been
opportunity.
very helpful.
It has, but I can't fathom saying that on our governing board here. I think they've really been generous in trying to look at people who do have homes here to be on these other boards, though. We have seen that.
Well, I just think, okay, I just think you don't want to overreact to this. I mean, you know, Don has been, you know, appointed and represents the ACNVT. I can't see them having a voting position, but I think we've always talked about, you know, non-voting residents having opportunity to speak to the town council.
But they already
I
do,
don't know
is
why,
what I'm saying.
you know,
Not really. And also, to your point about other disenfranchised population, that has to be addressed. That's not us, but yes, that does have to be addressed. And actually, Curtis has brought that up several times.
Correct.
That's a whole other issue.
Yeah, I
I'm
agree.
talking about the non-voting taxpayers. And as we've seen over the years, for the annual town meeting, we have to reach out to, I think, Sarah Alger, like a week ahead and request permission to speak. Now that we're considering a town council, it's an opportunity for us and we do own X amount of properties on Nantucket. We do pay higher taxes also. So all we're asking for is we know we can't vote, but we're asking to have some role, some influence. And I don't know if you call it part-time, as Pat was saying, you call it part-time residents or property owners or something, but we do deserve to have a seat at the table. Definitely.
I'm not sure everybody agrees with the last sentence on it,
But not to vote, not
I
to
just have
vote.
a question. So we talk about Barnstable a lot, and I know Curtis, and you've all probably watched a few of those. So they have the non-voting taxpayers that speak at public comment for the council meeting there. Is there language that Barnstable has that's inclusive of that outside of this? Because yeah, I mean, the way I read this, it would say residents, if you're a resident here, it doesn't say homeowners, because that would totally knock out a very large portion of our population for residents who are voters. So I mean, I'm just curious if Barnesville has anything that shows to provide more representation for them to be able to speak at the meeting. But for my own reasons outside of all of that, I do think that you're saying, Donna, that the non-voting taxpayers would like an at-large member designated on the council. I don't think I agree with that, because you can't, if you're not a voter in the community, how can you vote as the council to make those type of decisions? But I don't see why we would limit you. This part of this whole discussion that we've been having is moving from the select board to the council, would open an avenue for them to talk more, and you can go to our select board meeting now. And
Yes,
talk
we
and public
can.
comment, so
Right.
I wouldn't want language in the charter to be restrictive of that in any way. I would only want it to be more inclusive, and I mean, I guess the way I read this, other interested parties would be that language, but I just wanted to hear from the Collins if they
Yeah,
have anything else.
Pamela, I see your hands raised.
Pam?
Yes, and I'm gonna just comment as somebody from the general public. The reaction that I just heard to like having any input from whatever you want to call us, the part-time residents, is really hurtful. I mean, for people who have been coming to the island for over 30 years, who own a home here, but because our life doesn't allow us to have the luxury or I mean, I would love to live in Nantucket year round, but you know, my husband can't abandon the people he needs to care for. I can't abandon my other family responsibilities. I mean, many of us care deeply about the island. We'd like to be able to voice some opinions. We bring a knowledge base from other communities that could hopefully contribute and help. We also pay a substantial amount of the tax base on this island. We're not all bad. I mean, I think sometimes we are made out to be the villains because we aren't here year round or because we don't choose to vote here. But there's a lot of complex issues going into where you choose to vote. And my husband and I are working our way towards being voters here when he can retire in a couple of years. But, you know, it doesn't mean we care any less for the island. And I think considering what we can bring to the table in terms of comments, issues, ideas, and seeing things that happen, it's always good to have more people caring about the place than less. And, you know, I just don't jump all over it like it's such a bad idea. There's a way to make the contribution be effective and helpful.
Thanks, Pamela.
I guess when I read C, I don't see there a limitation. It doesn't distinguish. It says residents. It doesn't say full-time residents. It doesn't say registered voters. It doesn't say seasonal residents. It says residents. So when I read that as if you're a full-time resident or a seasonal resident, you have the opportunity to speak. And if you're not one of those two categories, you still have the opportunity to speak at the discretion of the council. So you could literally walk off the boat, walk into the council meeting, and you get recognized. You can share your thoughts. But if you are a resident of any kind, you can participate. There's nothing that limits that in that language.
Well, I think we would just like more of a formality, if you will, than just saying we can, Jeff, walk off a boat and express our opinion. What I'm saying is something, just like I'm on this committee. The town of Nantucket thought enough of the ACNVTs to suggest and include somebody. So what I'm saying is, can we take that and somehow, without offending full-time residents, include us? A little more inclusion is what I'm asking for us.
Kelly.
It feels like this question is getting bigger than 2.5 council procedures. Yeah. And to the disenfranchised non-voters too, like this is a huge topic from the people you're representing and this other demographic.
And they're not even at the table.
Yeah, so we could figure out how to entertain it.
Well, that's a whole other.
And Curtis knows more about, how Barnstable or, certainly Barnstable with his studies. So I don't know I don't know how to really close this out. I mean, I appreciate the request of the ACNVT. you know, I guess I feel like going to town council form, kind of similar to your comment, will give all residents more access to the town council. I'm not sure personally whether I think, you know, you get a, you know, the ACN MBT, you know, standing representative or something like that, but I couldn't see it being a member of the town council, so.
No, I'm not,
Yeah, and yeah.
we talked, we're not asking to be a member of the town council. We're asking for some sort of a role. Now, you could name it, you know, call it anything. But somehow, here's the town council, and then here is the ACNBT representative of some sort.
Yeah, just finishing what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
I think if we can be presented with different structures of that, like, I think we'd all be happy to look at them and entertain them. I don't know if we could come up with that right now. And yeah, I just don't see how this conversation is progressing without even knowing what those would look like. So I think, well, we probably all agree we want more inclusive representation. This section doesn't seem like the place to figure that out.
Okay.
Well,
Jen?
I mean,
Yeah.
I think, I 1,000,000% agree with Kelly, is we're straight way above 2.5 here, but I think in general, right now, if you're a non-registered, if you're an unregistered voter here, if you live here and you're a resident, you're not registered to vote, or you're a non-resident taxpayer, not registered to vote here, right now, your access to the legislative branch of government is, you get put in a separate room, you have to sit there and be quiet, right? And if you arrange in advance with a moderator, you might have the opportunity to participate. If deemed worthy, this establishes the chance for all of those people to participate and interact with the legislative branch, which is something that doesn't currently exist, whether there's a specific, you know, here's the non-voting taxpayer representative, here's the resident non-registered voter representative, here's whatever representatives for whatever groups. Those groups are all gaining direct access to the legislative branch of government, which doesn't currently exist. And I think that's, to me, the important part, is that the opportunity to participate is getting created, whether the details get sorted out to have those specific spots or a specific person designated as a liaison comes to pass. They're still getting access to the branch that they don't have access to right now.
You know, and I would add to that nothing is stopping the ACNBT, or for that matter, any group of non-franchised, however you want to call it, non-voting, non-represented groups here on Nantucket. Nothing stopping those groups from designating one or more of their members to be the regular attendees at town council meetings, and
Or even current select board meetings.
but
What about liaison, something like that? Again, yes, we can speak, and we're excited about this, that we can attend meetings on a regular basis. The town council is very important to this group. But again, without requesting a vote, because we can't federally, but a liaison, an ACNVT liaison to the town council, something of that sort. I don't think that's,
Don, I would say, fine. I mean, designate the liaison, and that person goes to town council meetings and, you know, stands up and represents whatever issues are on the.
but I'd
Okay,
like it in the charter.
Can I? speak
Can
to
that go in the charter?
What I was gonna suggest on, when we get to boards and commissions, is the council should set the boards and commissions, like some of them are set by state.
Yes.
But they could impanel boards and commissions, and they could say, oh, so we're gonna have our tree advisory committee and parks and recs. And then maybe the town manager appoints those people, or maybe the council does, that could be worked out, but they could impanel a board maybe, or impanel a commission for the non-resident voting
ACNVT?
tax. Yeah, and maybe they could have that. I mean, I could totally see that, or maybe that group is even bigger, like we were talking before. Maybe it's for all non-voting taxpayers, or I
That
don't know.
changes us, yeah.
But I'm saying I could see having something like that they appoint. but that wouldn't get specifically written in the charter because we want to give them the authority to decide what boards and commissions they want. See what I mean?
I do, I
But
understand.
I see what you're
but
saying about having a
you're saying-
representative. I get that.
This is the opportunity for this segment of the taxpayers to request something more than what we have. And that's what we're here for. I mean, Boston, the Tea Party. We want some sort of representation and we're being taxed at a higher level. And we love Nantucket. We're involved in Nantucket as we can be. And then we have our off-island lives at the moment. I mean, eventually I may settle here, but right now there are different issues and I'm not. So we're asking for some sort of representation.
But
And now's the time to do it.
Yeah, I hear you.
Liaison or something,
Um,
appointment of somehow.
are there examples, and I think question on to the Collins Center, are there examples where town councils have built in either things into the town's council itself or the charter that account for kind of unrepresented groups?
Pat or Mel, and
No.
does that, any of you?
So
From your
I'm not,
perspective?
oh, sorry, Mel, go ahead.
You go.
I was going to say, I don't know of any that have particularly written in a particular group as, you know, kind of a non-voting member of the town council. That doesn't happen. What I'm thinking is, for the purposes of this section, you might want to explore a definition of resident for having the reasonable opportunity to speak, a definition of residence that includes not only taxpayers, because there are probably a lot of people who rent full-time. And they may have kids in your school that, you know, to include to create a definition of residence that includes perhaps full and part-timers, you know, and that includes non-voting people who are not registered to vote. And that is an issue that, you know, we can work on. I would say that there may be town, I don't know that Barnstable hasn't included in their charter. I don't remember it being included, but it is possible that they have created town council rules of procedure that give a voice to different groups. We've also seen more part of an ideal of communication that makes sure that the town manager is reaching out to all elements of the community to keep them informed, to solicit input, et cetera. So that I have seen. And there's also, there has been some suggestions that maybe, you know, non-residents may be involved in certain committees where they might need help, you know, where committees would be involved, but I don't think there's anything baked into any of the charters that gives a specific part-time resident group a seat at the table. Anthony and Mel, do you have anything to add?
I was just going to suggest maybe going the other direction, is that perhaps deleting the line residents instead of placing attendees, and then maybe deleting that second sentence. I mean, because broadly speaking, you know, you're going to have a lot of different groups coming to speak to the town council, business owners who may or may not be residents. There's a number of different groups that I don't think that it's written in a way to exclude non-residents from speaking to the council, or if we're looking specifically at this section, but perhaps that terminology may be causing some angst.
Jeff?
Go ahead, Al.
I think my concern is residents, because then that takes us out. We are taxpayers,
Well, you're seasonal residents.
but we're taxpayers.
But you're still a seasonal.
You're still seasonal residents.
I know,
agree with
but
Jeff.
that's what,
Jeff, I think that.
You fall into
you're gonna
resident.
You
start
are.
with the word.
are you saying we fall into
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what
Okay.
I'm saying.
Yeah, you're just not a registered voter, but you're absolutely a resident.
Resident?
That's what
Yeah.
she's
Okay.
saying to define it, but I
So
think if we
therefore-
define it, it's getting too
Yeah.
into the detail, and I think the way the language reads, like right now, whether
It's
you're.
broad.
Whether you think that you fall under residents or whether you think you fall under interested parties, you're still permitted, as you are now, select board, you wouldn't be excluded And I think the charter is not meant to detail or outline a specific group like that. And where it says any rules or regulations that are adopted by the council, I think you would want to keep that level of detail in the policy adoption of the council or other groups, like Jill was saying, that you would, I mean, there could be many groups that say on, we keep finance committee and capital committee, and one of those members would be a member at large as a non-voting taxpayer. I think
Yeah.
there's ways to do that, but I would disagree that you would specifically put residents who are not like non-voting taxpayer. I think that level of detail doesn't belong in a charter.
But I think,
I think Tom, go ahead, Tom.
go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I completely agree with Anthony. And moreover, not last meeting, but the previous select board meeting, the chair took a full 3-minute comment from a resident of the Cape who was neither a resident here nor a taxpayer, plus a follow-up. And also I hear from Peter Kahn and Peter Holla quite often. So
Yep.
Yes, I'm sure
I
you do.
comment on that.
Oh, they've been on boards that were important, on work groups that were important too.
Right, but I've also been sent to request some sort of a position, and now is the time to request it. Again, not to vote, but to have some sort of what do they call it? Like an ad hoc committee, a standing committee?
You have
To-
a standing
along-
committee.
Yeah, okay, alongside the council.
I think we're just, I echo what Jeff and Kelly said. I think section 2.5 is not the place to have that represented. I think that goes more in terms of board members and committees.
Yeah,
I totally hear what you're saying, but I think this section in this conversation is out. I just don't think that's where it belongs in the charter. I think it belongs where, and I don't know. what
Where
that
do you
part
think it
looks like.
belongs?
Well,
There's a whole section here that says appointment versus election of members, boards and committees. I would imagine that there's language in a later section that might reference that. I don't think 2.5.
Okay,
Talk about
that-
that now. might be
well,
the spot.
But then why don't, yeah, as we move along, then maybe we'll have another opportunity. That sounds great.
Yeah, no, I think there's ample opportunity to continue.
Create some verbiage or continued discussion. Okay.
Sorry. Sorry.
Mr. Chair, yeah, can I just request a quick question? Changing the subject completely. Can residents request a special town meeting? Like a special meeting, you know, because it said council, and but can residents, voting residents?
You mean now?
A special council meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, not a town meeting, special.
Oh, sorry,
town
sorry, yeah.
council.
Oh, I think.
I know.
I believe, not to answer, and Council Center, please correct me when I put my foot in my mouth, and I know it goes back, so I'm gonna try to do this. I believe the powers of the citizen are outlined in a different section, whether it be for citizen petition or referendum or potential for calling a special town meeting. It's in a section specific outlining citizen power and duties there.
I think the answer is yes, but my guess is the Collins Center folks know the details better than I do. I just remember reading that there's a petition function or capability and in one of the other
Yeah, I
documents.
do remember back, I think in February, but I think it required so many signatures or something, or like there was a special
Like a petition?
procedure. Yeah,
Well, I think the number of signatures required for a bunch of these things, at least in the draft bylaw that they've given us, are more than currently an article, I think is 10 signatures, which personally I think is way too low.
But for special town meeting, it's more than that. It's
Yeah, it's not, special town meeting is 100, I think.
200.
Mr. Chair, I have to go for select board. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you have to, Tom, and we're bumping up against our
Need to go to.
end time anyway. Todd, I'm sorry, did you want to make a comment, Tom, or?
Nope.
Okay. Pat, we've sort of run up against 5 o'clock. Is there any concluding comments you want to make? Do you think we ought to pick this up again the next time? Maybe finish this discussion at our next get together?
Absolutely. And there's not that much more for us to get through in this legislative section. I will say that we can preview next time the resident participation requirements and where part-time residents might be included in those. That will be in a different article that we'll be discussing, in a few meetings.
Okay, and so just looking at your draft work plan, so the next section is other elected and appointed officials, and you're recommending, I guess you were recommending 2 meetings, so we've pretty much gotten through legislative in one. We're very efficient here. Anyway, will you, I presume you'll have some handout materials for us to discuss the next time?
We will.
Okay,
And we'll update, what we've talked about today to include the numbers that you've given us with tentatively the 9 counselors with staggered terms.
great. Appreciate it. Again, Anthony, Mel, and Pat, thank you so much for all your hard work and leading the conversation, the discussion today. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Rachel?
I
Jeff?
Aye.
Tom had to leave, right? Caroline?
Aye.
Jill?
Aye.
Kelly?
Aye.
Joe, aye. Thank you all. Appreciate everybody's time, and it was a good conversation today, I thought.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.